Hi everyone, so what I'd like to show you today is 8 different watercolor techniques. What you'll obviously need is a few paintbrushes to do these different techniques, as well as your watercolor paint and your water cup. So the first one I want to show you is a wash. A wash is when you use the water to create value within your watercolor piece. Usually a wash has a lot of water in it and it's light in color, but it fills your entire page. Washes are good, especially if you're trying to fill in an area with one color. You can also see how my wash varies in value, so how dark or how light it is, just based on how much water I added to my brush. So that's wash. Number 2 is a dry brush, and this is exactly what it sounds like. So your paint does need a little bit of water to kind of activate, and what this dry brushing does is it creates a lot of value and what almost looks like an implied texture. So using barely any paint and barely any water and a pretty dry brush. Perfect, so that's dry brushing. Next is water onto wet, and this is exactly what it sounds like. So you want to get your watercolor paper wet to start. So I'm going to use yellow, and I'm going to use a lot of that watercolor paint so that it's a bright, bold color. So while my paint is still wet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clean brush and I'm going to do exactly what it says. I'm going to put water onto the wet paint. So I'm taking just the water and I'm dripping it and dropping it into random spots on my watercolor paper. And what this does is it creates almost like a dispersed splatter effect once it starts to dry. Here you can also do wet into wet, where you can drop in different and new colors into that wet paint. So number 4 is salting, and this is exactly what it sounds like as well. So very similar to our wash, we want to load up the area with paint. And I'm going to use, or want to use, a lot of water, because when we put the salt on it, what the salt does is it absorbs the water off of the paper. Very similar to in the wintertime when those snowplow trucks put salt on the road. What that salt does is it absorbs water and it absorbs up the ice, so that makes the roads safe to drive on. So I'm going to create my wash first with value. And then you take salt, like table salt, and you just sprinkle it onto the watercolor. If there's not enough water on your paper, the salting technique won't work. So you want to make sure that there's water on there. And then you just let this dry and brush the salt off, and it creates this spotty, lighter texture. Number 5 is a wax resist, and we've probably done this on a few of our projects. So the wax in crayons or even candles this will work with doesn't like water. It resists it. It tells it to get away from it. So when the water in the watercolor paint hits that wax in the crayon, what it does is it doesn't allow the water or the watercolor to penetrate where the wax is. So you can't get that paint where the wax is. I'm using white to show you how this works. So similar to the wash or in the other techniques, I'm going to load up with my color. This would be a good technique if you want to include words or different designs into your background. Number 6 is taping, so you're going to use tape, and this shows you where the negative and the positive space is within your artwork. So obviously where the tape is where your paint won't go. And it's okay to actually put the paint right on the tape because you're going to take it off no matter what you do. What's nice about this technique too is you can combine this technique with any of the other techniques. So if you want to drop colors into your taping, you can add value, you can add more water, you can do your drips, If you want to drop another color, like the blue, you can combine your techniques. So there's a water on wet and taping. I'm going to come back to this because I want to let it dry for a couple minutes. So number 7 is paper towel or tissue. This one creates an awesome texture. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of paper towel or a tissue, and I'm going to crumple it up. And I'm going to use the texture of the paper towel to create a texture on my watercolor. There's that one. And then last but not least is a splatter or a controlled splatter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover up the other techniques just so you can see how we do this one. So we want to be as controlled as possible with this. And what I mean by controlled is you want to have control of your paintbrush while you do this. So what I like to do is I like to hold the paintbrush as close to the paper as possible, and then I just like to tap. A lot of people too will tap using another paintbrush, but I think it's just easy to tap right on it. This one works really well too if there's a good amount of the watercolor paint on your paintbrush, because you want to have something that falls off of that paintbrush. With this one, you can also combine colors, and you'll notice too that it's very controlled. I'm not getting splatter all over the place. I'm getting a very controlled combination of these little dots. What you can also do is you can combine any of these techniques together to create a new technique. So if you want to do a wash with the taping, or if you want to do a wax with the taping, or a water into wet with a salting and a wax resist, you can combine all of these to really create depth and texture within your background. So what I'm doing now is I'm just pulling up the tape from the tape resist, and you can see where the negative space is. So for the project, I'd like you to use all of these, if not close to all of these. I want to see a combination of techniques